I know wrong from right, and my life has meaning.
Good morning, Austin, and welcome to the Atheist Experience. Coming at you live October 3rd. As our telephone number. We'll be taking your calls live on the air here shortly. I always like to start out with announcements of Atheist Community of Austin. We meet every Sunday down at the Hot Jumbo Bakery, except for the first Sunday of every month, which we have our guest lectures series. And today's speaker is going to be John Koonz, who is also our guest on today's show. And that takes place at Furs at North Cross Mall at 11 a.m. when the restaurant opens at 11. And there's a Longhorn room in the back. And you're free, open to the public, and come on down and meet John Koonz in person. And I think after today's show, you might have some questions for him or something. The other things I'd like to mention is we're doing our blood drive. October 30th is a Saturday, and we're trying to come up with a good name to coincide with Halloween there. So who knows, might even dress up and go down there, get in costume and go get blood in costume there. Yeah, we'll definitely keep you up to date on that and give you more notice on that. And that's
we just that was scary.
Yes. So.
All right, cut that out.
All right. This time, though.
Wait a minute. I want to, while we're doing announcements.
Sure, go ahead.
We're trying to get a group together of people from the Atheist Community of Austin to go to Enchanted Rock to enjoy that very impressive natural wonder on the 23rd of this month. So those of you who are interested, contact either me or Vic. Best place to do that would probably be down at the bagel shop, or if you have our email addresses, you can contact us that way, because we're trying to get a big gang together. So that's that.
But yeah, that's a wonderful state park, and that's a Saturday. So it's only 2 weeks away.
Yep.
3 weeks.
No, it would be three, wouldn't it?
3 weeks away. So yeah, and we'll keep you up to date on that and give you more news on that.
Okay.
So there's all kinds of news going on this week with. Yes, so I'll let you pass it on over to you here with.
Let's start with this story that David Bagley brought in from the Killeen Daily Herald. It's an actual news story. Now we don't really need a close-up on this. Killeen Daily Herald, they can read that. Okay. Cove area residents spellbound by presentation on the occult. Apparently, the Central Texas Council of Government's Criminal Justice Division is sponsoring this guy, this 45-year-old cult survivor Greg Reed, who claims that he was a victim of bizarre rituals involving sexual abuse, pornography, and human sacrifice until the age of 15. And now he goes around telling everybody about the evils of satanic ritual abuse. And this government thing is sponsoring this. The problem is, of course, that there is not a shred of evidence that this stuff is really going on. If there's any cult at work here, it's the cult of Christians in law enforcement who continue to hype this particular issue and go around claiming that there's all this satanic ritual abuse happening and warning everyone when there's not a shred of evidence that it's actually happening. So anyway, that's that. I don't want to read too much of it. If anybody has any questions, call in. On to the rest of the news. Governor Jesse Ventura slams religion in Playboy interview. This has been all over the news, but just to recap, Ventura said, talking about prostitution, he said, prostitution is criminal and bad things happen because it's run illegally by dirtbags who are criminals. If it was legal, then the girls could have health checks, unions, benefits, anything any other worker gets, and it would be far better. He was asked, this isn't a very popular position in America, is it? To which he responded, no, and it's because of religion. Organized religion is a sham and a crutch for weak-minded people who need strength in numbers. It tells people to go out and stick their noses in other people's business. I live by the golden rule. Treat others as you'd want them to treat you. The religious right wants to tell people how to live. And he's gotten a lot of flack from this. His spokesmen have said in his defense that that Jesse Ventura and his wife are actually members of a church, and he really only meant to attack right-wing fundamentalists. And they've also said that he was he was intentionally being provocative because it was a Playboy interview and it was expected of him. But for whatever reason, it's always a joy to see people come out and tell exactly what they think of religion in the press.
I find it so refreshing that a politician is willing to take a stand and is not going to take a poll. And that most politicians are so wishy-washy today that they're afraid to take a stand on anything. And more power to you, Jesse Ventura.
Well, they're quite willing to take stands on things that they know they will have a lot of support on.
Right. Well, whatever direction the polls take them, and they stand by their own convictions, and Jesse Ventura seems to be doing that.
Yep, and he is on record in the past refusing to have a state-sponsored day of prayer because he acknowledged the existence of atheists and said, well, we have to respect their rights too. We can't have government sponsoring religion. So that's cool. More evolution evidence for those of you keeping score at home. A crustacean in Germany's Lake Constance has evolved quickly to allow it to consume toxic forms of its main food source. Crustaceans that have adapted to increasing levels of pollution in that German lake over the last 30 years are controlling the growth of toxic blue-green algae, researchers reported in Thursday's issue of the journal Nature. It appears that ecological events that we think of as occurring relatively quickly, such as nutrient enrichment of a lake, can be influenced by the rapid evolution of the animals that are affected, said Nelson Hairston, a biologist at Cornell University. They've had phosphorus pollution in the lake over the last 30 years. As a result, the Daphnia found the more and more toxic cyanobacteria, known as blue-green algae, mixed in with their non-toxic algae and consumed them as their diet. They have adapted to the less nutritious diet, which has not only ensured their survival, but also served as a natural control for the cyanobacteria in the lake, said Hairston. In any case, they have samples of this creature from 30 years ago, and they have samples of the current version of the animal, and they tested them each, because these things go into sort of hibernation for long periods of time. So they woke up some of the 30-year-old ones and had them try to eat the food that was in the lake, and then they imported some of the current live creatures, and they found that the current ones could handle the diet as it existed in the lake now, and the old ones couldn't. Okay, and now those of you who insist on calling in and complaining that this is only microevolution and not macroevolution, you go right ahead and make our day. City sues Brooklyn Museum over sensation exhibit. This has been all over the news too, but again, just to recap, there's the mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani, is up in arms over this exhibit, which was advertised as an intentionally provocative, disturbing exhibit of extreme art that might offend people. And one of them is Catholic artist Chris Olifi's portrait of a black Madonna stained with elephant dung and pasted with cutouts from porno magazines. Oh, I hadn't heard that before. In any case, they're of course screaming, and Deputy Mayor Joe Lota said, "It's not an issue of freedom of expression, it's an issue of what you can do in a government-owned building. You cannot use a government-owned facility for desecrating someone else's religion or for increasing the profits of a private individual." Well, the problem is, and this was discussed on Crossfire on CNN, and some interesting points were raised. The liberal commentator on the show responded to the conservatives who said, well, the government has got an influence over what this artistic organization does because we give them funding, therefore we should use that to control what they can display. And the liberal guy said, well, the thing is that you conservatives insisted that we shouldn't have government funding of the arts in the first place, because if we did, the government would use that as a means of controlling the arts. And now that we've got a situation where the arts are doing something that we don't like, why are you conservatives screaming that we should exercise the control that funding gives us, that granting that funding gives us, to tell them what to do? If you didn't like the idea of the government intruding into the arts, why are you asking us to take advantage of that control now? To which they didn't really have an answer. They also interviewed a guy from the Catholic League who was screaming that, we're not allowed to teach religion in schools, but we are allowed to teach anti-religion in our government-funded arts programs. To which the appropriate response was given, which is, hey, our government-funded art museums are just chock full of religious art. It would be the absence of the opposite point of view that would be a bias presented by government. So anyway, that's that. Man in search of an heir gets something to think about. In Pine City, Minnesota, a man who has promised to will his $375,000 estate to a church opened his living room on Saturday to ministers and lay people, hoping they could provide him answers to weighty theological questions. This story was carried on CNN. Clayton Goward, 79, hasn't decided which church will get the money yet. Goward began his search for an heir with a personal ad in the Star Tribune of Minneapolis in July, appealing for suggestions for what to do with his estate, since he's estranged from his 3 sons and divorced their mother long ago. Because of the news coverage that followed, he's received more than 40,000 pieces of mail and says he doesn't want any more.
Why get so spiritual if there's no market for it?
Perfect, Arlo.
So he has 60, in excess of 60 people packed into his living room. These were all fundamentalists and evangelical ministers that came from all over the country. Now, the CNN story says these guys were more interested in sharing their faith than getting his money, but I wonder how they can possibly know that. The guy says he's got $375,000 to give away, and he gets 60 or more ministers packed into his living room.
Lord,
where the assumption...
just make me lie down in the green. Oh, yes, Lord. Let me lie down in the green. I want to be in the green, Lord.
That was great, Arlo.
So he asked them some pointed questions. Is it really necessary to be born again? How can we know the Bible is true? Why can't we know it instead of having to guess? The crowd, again heavy on evangelicals and Pentecostals, was eager to help resolve his uncertainty and get the money, which of course they gloss over. The fact that you're questioning, Clayton, is a sign that God is working in your heart, said David Holt, a pastor from First Evangelical Free Church in La Crosse, Wisconsin. This guy came from La Crosse, Wisconsin. Not because he wanted the $375,000. Oh no, just to answer these weighty spiritual questions. And I love the attitude behind that response. The fact that you're questioning is a sign that God is working in your heart. I love how theists will take the existence of people that disagree with them as evidence that they're right. The mere existence of people having questions is proof that they're right to these guys. Why isn't God here right now? Goward asked later. He is, nearly everyone responded in unison. I don't see him, Goward said. He expressed his frustration that there are so many religions and so many different interpretations of the Bible. The frustration was illustrated by the heated debate that broke out after Gary Amaralt, who drove in from Herman, Missouri. Again, he drove all the way from Missouri, not because he wanted the $375,000. Oh no, just to answer this guy's religious questions. This guy disputed the existence of hell. The lengthy debate appeared to sway no one, though Goward said he found it interesting. The story has a sad ending, though, because afterward, Goward said, I'm going to mull it over. What I'm just going to have to do is believe it's a faith thing. It's too bad that among those 60 people, there were no atheists lured by the $375,000 to dispute some of the claims that, that there's some obligation on this man to believe.
Why didn't we send somebody up there?
I didn't hear about it until after the fact.
That's too bad.
And he's not accepting any more mail.
I would love to have the video of that meeting with the 60 people.
That would be something, wouldn't it? I bet local news covered it.
I'd like to see 10,000 people give $10,000. I don't even know how much money that is. Well, that's too much money.
That would be $100,000, Mr. Minister. Do your math.
That was Jim Baker.
Oh, yeah, he had.
What a surprise.
It wasn't enough money, probably. All right, go ahead.
Now, following up on something we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks, the The cat's out of the bag as far as the Cassie Bernal story. Last week we reported that first a independent news service on the internet and then a local Denver paper carried the story that evidence is that the Cassie Bernal myth is exactly that, a myth. She said nothing of the kind. It didn't happen to her. And that was picked up this week by ABC. Littleton, Colorado. Cassie Bernal, the young woman held up as a martyr after the Columbine High bloodbath, may not have been the student who said yes when asked by one of the gunmen if she believed in God. Valerie Schnurr, 18, said in Tuesday's Denver Post that it was she who uttered the response after a shotgun blast knocked her out from under a library table where she'd been hiding during the attack in April. Ms. Schnurr said that as she bled from her wounds, she pleaded, oh my God, don't let me die." That, she said, was when one of the student shooters asked her if she believed in God, and she said yes. Ms. Schnurr said she crawled away as the gunman reloaded. She suffered nearly 36 gunshot wounds. Lauren Townsend, a friend hiding with her, was killed, along with Miss Bernal, 10 other students, and a teacher. The two teenage gunmen then killed themselves. Police said a student who helped authorities retrace the events in the library got sick when he realized it was Miss Schnurr's table, not Miss Bernal's, that he was pointing out when describing the exchange between the gunman and victim. So that's no big surprise. Days after this story hit the news waves, atheists on the Alt Atheism news group had caught on to the fact that the various reports of this incident contained facts or claims of facts that were directly contradictory and that something was going on. Nobody was sure exactly who was lying, but it was clear that there were multiple versions of this and that there were some myth makers were at work trying to trump it up. So it's really unfortunate. Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't want to give the impression that we don't care about those kids dying or we don't think that was a tragedy, because obviously it is. The point here is that within days after that event, that was being used, this made-up scene was being used as justification to bring religion back into the public school and bring in school prayer, which violates the United States Constitution. And that's really the issue there, that this was being used, these kids and their suffering was being used by politicians, religious right politicians, for their own advantage.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up again. I mean, I've in the last 2 weeks, I've opened my reports on this developing story with that exact comment. We are not trying to say this wasn't a tragedy. We're trying to say that it was exactly what it was, and it was not what they are playing it up to be in order to advance their religious agenda. What really surprises me is that they latched on to Cassie Bernal to idolize, when Valerie Schnurr actually lived through the attack and said, oh my God, don't let me die, and didn't die. You would think that they would latch onto that and say, well, look, this is proof that God allowed her to survive. And I'm not really sure why they grabbed hold of one and not the other. Was it because living martyrs just don't fly? They might say things that are inconvenient. Is it because Valerie Schnurr does not scan quite as well as Cassie Bernal? Who knows? Maybe it was because Valerie's parents were not quite as opportunistic as Cassie's. I have here printouts from the Yes I Believe, www.yesibelieve.com website. This is the website where they sell Cassie Bernal related merchandise. They've got permission from Cassie's family to use her name and sell all kinds of stuff. They have, of course, the book that just came out. Then there's the She Said Yes, a video tribute to Cassie Bernal by her friends. That's $20. There is She Said Yes, a Bible study, a 5-chapter Bible study about the life and testimony of Cassie Bernal is being produced. It highlights 5 characteristics about her life that made her to be our nation's most impacting teenager. Excerpts from She Said Yes, that's the book, run throughout the study. I'm sorry, it's a Bible study course on the life and testimony of Cassie Bernal? I didn't know that she was even mentioned in the Bible. Then there's Crossroads at Columbine, a 45-minute drama that will be available for purchase. I guess it's a video reenactment. Crossroads at Columbine will be a wonderful opportunity for you to minister to your community at a time when all are asking questions. The play is based on the book She Said Yes. Oh, what a surprise. Yes, I Believe bracelets. That's just like the What Would Jesus Do bracelets, only they say Yes, I Believe. Yes, I Believe jewelry, necklaces, dog tags, spinners, and keychains. Yes, I Believe t-shirts. And yes, I Believe hats.
Jeff, is that for profit?
That is for profit.
It's not
a portion of the, let's see, a portion of the proceeds from Yes, I Believe will be given to the Cassie Bernal Foundation. And they've all the products have been approved and endorsed by the Bernal family.
But somebody's making a profit out of it.
Of course they're making a profit.
That's sleazy.
What a surprise. They have a chat room, and I was going to go in there and chat, because I thought that they might be able to benefit from a outside perspective. But I encountered this incredibly long list of rules about their chat room, and I just want to read you some of the rules. 1, our intent at yesibelieve.com is that the discussion board and chat rooms will be used to discuss our experiences using Yes, I Believe products to witness to others, such as Yes, I Believe bracelets and how you use them to reach others and tell them about your life with Jesus Christ. Okay, so it's no discussion of whether this was actually true. Only discussion about, wow, aren't our products great? 2, also tell us about how wearing the Yes, I Believe bracelet and other Yes, I Believe items affects the way you make everyday decisions in your life, and give us some examples. More hype for their products. Now they do say, 3, we understand that there are many people with questions about Christianity and the Bible. We will do our best to discuss these issues and advise those looking for help. But then, after number 4, which is just a very standard, number 4 starts out sounding like a very standard, don't use our chat rooms or discussion board for making personal attacks or using foul language. It says, we will not tolerate foul language, profanity, vulgarity, personal insults, harassment, bigotry, anti-Christian posts, or links to anti-Christian websites on this yesibelieve.com discussion board and chat rooms. Messages that violate this policy will be removed. So if you dare to step in and say, gosh, you know, maybe what you believe isn't true, they'll delete you. What a surprise. And they reiterate in 5 that they will delete posts that they find that their Christian users find offensive. And I love number 6, do not post advertisements or solicitations on their discussion board or chat rooms. Only advertisements and solicitations for their own product, please.
Exactly.
And then here's the instructions. If you discover a post that you find offensive, contains foul language, profanity, vulgarity, personal insults, harassment, bigotry, anti-Christian posts, or links to anti-Christian websites, please report them to office@yesibelieve.com. Amazing. Amazing the way they have completely insulated themselves from any chance of anybody talking to their customers and letting them know what really happens. Here's the Bernal family endorsement from their website. Oh, you don't have to zoom in on this. That's not necessary. The Bernal family endorsement. Our Cassie was the young woman who boldly answered to a gunman yes when he asked if she believed in God, prompting him to pull the trigger. Interesting that the family endorsement says she was the young woman when the authorities have said that they informed the Bernal family of their findings when they investigated this story. Let's see. So we are now endeavoring to be responsible with the ministry that God has given to us to carry Cassie's message throughout the world. We are excited about the ministry that her testimony has opened up. As a result, we are working with Yes, I Believe, Inc. to provide several avenues of ministry in this area. We gladly endorse Yes, I Believe, Inc. as the official line of products. Thank you for your gift to the foundation. Oh yeah, they have a special line where you can make secure contributions. If you don't actually want any of their products, you can just give them money, and they make sure you can do that without your credit card number being stolen. And then, most interesting at all, there was a page marked media exposure, and I thought for sure this was going to respond to some of the things in the press about how the story just wasn't true. But no, all it is on their media exposure page is a list of magazines and TV shows that have talked about their book, Yes, I Believe, And the date that that the story appeared, no links to the actual story, so you can't find out what was actually said, and no response to any of the announcements of the investigations that have shown that it wasn't true. They're just completely insulating their customers from any way to discover that the product is based on a myth. And that's just sickening. This girl was killed, and that's terrible. But to then turn around and lie about the circumstances of her death in order to promote their particular religion and make money is just sick.
And I'm sure we'll be able to find out somehow, but at the end of the year here, when they go to file their taxes, I'm curious how much money they're going to claim.
Interesting.
How much income they actually made this year off of
I don't really care. If they've made a single penny, it's sick.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But just remind everyone, we are coming to you live October 3rd, and today is our guest lecture series at Furs at North Cross Mall, and our guest speaker will be John Koonz. He's a local science teacher, and with Kansas hitting the news about evolution and everything else,
right,
we're definitely glad to get you in here and discuss evolution in a little bit more detail. We've had callers that have called in asking us detailed questions. I'd answer the best I could. I'm just a layperson, but we now actually have someone here that can actually answer detailed questions.
Well, I'll try anyway.
We're actually giving science's best answer at this time.
Right.
That is not the absolute answer.
Right. Well, I notice you always get callers at the end of the show, 4 minutes before the end of the show, that want to know about the history of the universe, and they want to know everything from the Big Bang onwards, and you to explain it, and you got 4 minutes. And so I thought, well, this will be a chance to talk about some basic science. Excuse me. I know some of this has been covered before, but I thought what I would do is go through and just talk about real basic information here about scientific thinking and what it does and what it doesn't do. What science is it's our way for looking for answers about questions we have about the universe. And the cutting edge of science changes over time. So what's really neat and controversial now in science is not what it was 400 years ago. So also something that we should admit about science is that it's done by scientists who are human beings. And so scientists make mistakes. Sometimes scientists let their ego get in the way of their work. Sometimes they are not careful enough with their work. But the beauty of science and the way it's done is that science has a built-in mechanism for catching its own mistakes. And so if you're a scientist and you make an astonishing discovery about something, then what you do is you publish your findings in a scientific journal. And the scientific journal is a peer-reviewed journal, so that means that other scientists have looked over the work and checked to see if there's any statistical mistakes or basic mistakes like that. And then when the work is published, it's out there for all the other scientists in your field to look at and to see if they can duplicate your results. And if it's found out that your results and your findings are not duplicated by anybody, that somehow there's something wrong here, well, your ideas are not going to make it. On the other hand, if your ideas bring to light some new discoveries, get people thinking along new lines, make sense of pieces of information that people have been wondering about maybe for a while, then your ideas are very likely to go on and become part of what's established as good science and what people generally think of as being true and accurate about the universe. So science does have that built-in mechanism for catching its mistakes. It's kind of a free marketplace of ideas where people are able to check on each other's work. That's what's one of the most important things about science. Another thing that comes up on the show, I've seen a number of times, is people talking about theories. And it's not just about evolution, but you'll hear people say the word theory as if it means just a guess. Well, I'd say that a better word than theory, or a word you can use in its place, I should say, is the word explanation. So anytime you hear a scientific theory being talked about, you could just exchange the word theory for explanation, and you can say that's a scientific explanation. Now, the scientific explanation may also be true. Maybe it needs some revising before you really consider it very accurate. But scientific theories are not just guesses. In common language, the word theory tends to mean what in science we call a hypothesis. A hypothesis is like an educated guess, where you think you know what's going on, you think you have an explanation, and now you're going to go out and test it. But a scientific theory is much more substantial than that. Theories do several things. First of all, they make predictions. A good scientific theory makes predictions about what other discoveries you may find. Also, scientific theories explain previously made observations and will tend to make sense of seemingly unrelated bits of information. Scientific theories also have to have a way that you could, in principle anyway, disprove the entire idea. For instance, talking about the Earth being round. I can imagine discoveries that I could make that would disprove the idea that the Earth is round. If I got in a sailboat and I sailed off into the Pacific Ocean, and then I fell off, and I was just falling through space, then on the way down, I could start thinking, hey, guess what? I just disproved the idea that the Earth is round. But I can imagine at least a way that that could happen. That doesn't mean that just because I can imagine a way that I can disprove a theory, that it's likely that that's going to happen. But that's an important aspect of what a theory is. Also, theories open up new lines of research. And they're also strengthened all the time by being tested. Good scientific theories are being tested all the time. And over time, as time goes by and they withstand that test of time and repeated testing, they're strengthened by the fact that in all that time nobody's found anything to significantly disprove the theory. So that's some basic information about what scientific theories are. I know there's a lot of misunderstanding about that. In teaching school, I spend a lot of time on this because it's important that people understand some of the basics. And what I find in teaching school is that it's a good idea to start the year with this and talk about it quite in depth so that later on when you do get to the evolution unit or you talk about cosmology, you're talking about the Big Bang, then when people bring up the word theory as a guess, then I've got something to go back to and say, no, let's revisit this and relearn this because it's important that you get the real definitions. I thought I'd also say something about Charles Darwin, since occasionally I know callers will call into the show and say things that are untrue about Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin was a very important figure in science, and I personally thought he was a great guy. I wish I could have been alive in his time to have met him in person. One of the things I heard one time on a show was Charles Darwin being described as a racist, and that his scientific discoveries about natural selection, how evolution works, were somehow racially motivated. Well, there's nothing farther from the truth. Charles Darwin's family was a family that had stood out against slavery, and in fact, on Charles Darwin's trip around the world, he had actually spoken out against slavery at some risk to his own well-being, might add. His trip around the world, by the way, was not taken on as an attempt to attack Christianity. He wasn't going on this trip around the world to prove that species change. He wasn't going on the trip on his trip around the world for any of those reasons that sometimes you hear. Actually, the reason he was going on his voyage was to keep the captain of the boat, Captain Fitzroy. The name of the ship was HMS Beagle, but his real purpose there was to keep him company. And because the captain on a British warship, probably really any warship at that time period, it was very, very, very harsh discipline, and the captain was expected to remain real distant from the other crew members. The captain did not just walk up and down the decks of the ship, slapping sailors on the back and saying, "Hey, how's it going?" He maintained a distance, and that, on a 4 or 5 year long voyage, that could lead to a lot of loneliness. Well, he had the option of bringing somebody with him at his own expense. And actually, kind of a pseudoscience thing here, Charles Darwin almost didn't make it on the trip because the captain, Captain Fitzroy, believed in a pseudoscience of the time, phrenology. That the study of the shape of a man's head told you something about the person's character. And I guess he felt the lumps on Charles Darwin's head and decided that he wasn't really the right sort of person to bring on a trip like that. and almost didn't take him. And then I can't remember the details of it, but it seems like he was talked into it in the end. Charles Darwin was an avid naturalist, and he collected animal specimens, plant specimens, fossils, collected rocks. He had a lot of interest in natural history, but he wasn't a professional scientist. He was actually on his way to becoming a minister in the Church of England. He came from a very wealthy family. I think his father was a doctor, and his father wanted him to be a doctor. But Charles Darwin didn't like that line of work, and left medical school, if I remember the story right, before he was even finished with it. And so the father decided, well, maybe his kid needs to be a minister. And from what I've read, Charles Darwin seemed to actually be content with that, because a minister would only have to work a small amount of the week, leaving plenty of time free for hunting and fossil collecting and the other things that Charles Darwin liked to do. So he went on his trip around the world, and he collected a vast number of organisms and specimens. And it wasn't really until later, when he got back to England and studied what he had sent home — he had so much stuff collected he actually had to send it home in bits and pieces along the way — that he started thinking about the origin of species and why different individuals of species look so similar in certain parts of the world, and what the connection was there between different species that look so similar, but yet they're different. And in doing that, he developed his theory of natural selection. One of the reasons he's an important scientist, too, is that he was extremely thorough. And he spent, I think it was 20-some-odd years working on his book on the origin of species, where he talked about natural selection. And in fact, when he published that, he was only partway done, in his mind, with his book. And his book is some 400 pages long, at least in the version I had. And the reason he published it prematurely, he felt, was because around the world, a man by the name of Alfred Wallace, kind of in a malarial fit, thought up the idea of natural selection independently of Charles Darwin. Well, he had sent a paper to be read at the I can't remember the name of the organization, but it was in, I might want to say Royal Society, but I may be wrong about that. But at any rate, it was an important place to have important discoveries read. And when Charles Darwin heard about this, he obviously, felt like he ought to get his name in there too, seeing as he had been working on this for a number of years. What Darwin had done, though, to show what a decent person he is or was that he arranged to have his paper and Wallace's paper read together. Charles Darwin could have jumped the gun on this. He could have rammed his own work through there quickly to try to get all the credit for himself. But being a decent human being, he did not do that. Another myth is that Charles Darwin converted to Christianity on his deathbed. I've read several accounts of the details of that, and there's simply no evidence to support that. That's a Christian myth that's come about to try to somehow make it look like Charles Darwin's work wasn't really that important. But the fact is, even if Charles Darwin had become a born-again evangelist on his deathbed, it wouldn't make any difference as far as what his work actually says. So that doesn't really make any difference. A good book to read is Charles Darwin's autobiography. If you read it, you'll want to read the unedited version. He had a version that his wife had cut part out. And the part that was cut out was the part where he discusses his personal philosophies. He talked about what he believed. And it was very interesting because he was pretty clear in there what his feelings about Christianity are. He felt that it was basically an obnoxious religion. That if it was true that himself and most of the people he cared most about were going to be condemned to hell. And I think he called it a damnable doctrine. I think that's the wording he had in his autobiography. But that part would have caused a lot of family grief, so he had that. His wife had that part cut out. His wife was actually very religious, and one of the reasons that Charles Darwin did not push his ideas as hard as he personally could have had to do partly with not rocking the boat with his wife at home. So there's something about Charles Darwin right there. He was an excellent scientist. He was an all-round decent guy. If you'd like to learn more about him, read his autobiography, read his diary on the Voyage of the Beagle. Talks about his trip around the world, and you get a real flavor for what he was really like. Shall I go on?
Just remind everyone, this is live October 3rd. We'll be taking any questions you might have. Feel free, that's the number there. And but you got some excellent notes here.
Yeah.
And again, you have demonstrations that you're going to be showing at FERS at North Cross Mall to help.
Yeah, I just wanted to clear the air on a couple issues there with some basic science and evolution, so that later on we get somebody calling in knocking Darwin, we can say we've already done that and not waste time. Now, what I'll do now is I'll talk about some of the things about evolution specifically. Evolution is a fact. Evolution happens. Evolution means change to species over time. The fact is, people before Charles Darwin realized that the species changed somehow. They didn't understand why, they didn't understand how, but they did realize that when you look in the fossil record, you see things that are no longer alive. And when you look around out there in the world, you don't see some of the animals that are in the fossil record. Obviously, some changes have occurred, and what Charles Darwin did really was not invent the idea of evolution, which had already existed. What he did was he discovered the process by which evolution occurs, and that's natural selection. And in his book, if you read it, actually there's a lot of information in there that's no longer considered accurate. One thing that Charles Darwin did not understand is how genetics worked. He had no real understanding of how traits were inherited from the parents to the offspring. So that it waited until there was a synthesis there between natural selection and our understanding of genetics for a more modern, it's called the modern synthesis. The real explanation for evolution to be really fleshed out took until after Charles Darwin was already dead. But natural selection is the basic process by which evolution occurs. I'll tell you what, so break up the little talk here, so I know everybody's probably falling asleep out there. They probably think I take notes or take a test or something. Here's we'll do a little demonstration that I like to do in school that talks about one of the common misunderstandings of evolution, and I call this the randomness ploy. Now, in the randomness ploy, I'm gonna have to write something down here on this. The randomness ploy is where you'll get people who don't understand or appreciate the beauty of evolution to say that, well, evolution could not possibly have happened because it would be like a tornado blowing through a junkyard and just randomly being able to assemble a fully functioning 747 that could take off on a runway and fly away, and that all this evolution, this mixing up of genes, it's no more going to produce a human being than that tornado in the junkyard. What they don't understand is that natural selection is a cumulative process. First of all, natural selection is very, very simple. Basically, here's what it says. More individuals, I should say, are born than can survive. If you have a family pet, if you have a cat that's had kittens, then you know this. Over the lifetime of a cat, it can produce 4 kittens in a litter. It can have several litters, a couple of litters anyway, a year, and the cat may live several years. Obviously, that's going to be more kittens than the world could hold if all of them were to survive. Now, in a domestic situation, obviously, this doesn't really come into play because you're going to be able to feed the kittens. But in the wild, there won't be enough food for all of them. Only some of the kittens are going to be able to survive to adulthood to be able to pass on their traits to the next generation. So there's a sorting process that occurs. Only those organisms that have the necessary traits to survive in that environment are going to survive. Anything that doesn't isn't going to make it long enough to reproduce. Sometimes natural selection is put across as some kind of big bad thing where only the big animals that with the really sharp teeth that kill other things get to live. That's not true. In many cases, what we've discovered is that what makes an organism fit may very well be its ability to communicate, to work well with others within its species, to form social bonds, And so the idea of survival of the fittest, where things are big and mean and nasty, living and everything else dying, is simply false. Anyway, sometimes people will say that there's no way that could possibly happen, that you could have all these little changes build up over time to actually, change very much. But what we'll do is we'll take these I have 5 coins. I have a quarter, a nickel, a dime, and 2 pennies. Now one of the pennies here is a little bit darker, and the other one's kind of shiny. So we're going to count those 2 separate coins there, and so we have 5 coins. We're going to randomly shuffle these up right here, and I'm going to dump them down. I'm not going to place them in any way. There we go. And what we'll do is I'll record what we have, and you can. It looks like we're going to try to get a close-up over here. You can play this game at home, and if we do get a close-up here.
And you're recording heads and tails?
That's right. I'm just writing down the dark penny. Okay, the quarter is heads up. The dime is tails up. The nickel is tails. The shiny penny is heads. The dark penny is tails. And the way we play the game in school is I ask the students to try to figure out a way that you can get this exact sequence here back by picking up the coins and dropping them again, but get it within 4 or 5 drops. Sometimes you can get it as little as 3. And they start doing this, and they realize, wait a second, every once, I think I had one kid 2 years ago that was actually able to get the thing, first time, which is what you'd expect. If you work out the statistics here, each coin has 2 different ways that it can go, and there's 5 coins. That's 2 to the 5th power. The odds of dropping these coins right now and getting this exact sequence are 1 over 32. So that's not very good odds, and if I say I'm going to get this within 5 drops, that's not very realistic. But here's how it's done. You take the coins, and you drop them again, and when you look at them and you see, what do you got? Well, the quarter, that came up tails, so that's not good. The dime came up heads, that's not good. The shiny penny came up tails, that's not good. The nickel came up heads, that's not any good. Well, we're not doing so well. Dark penny, every single one of them. Okay, great.
All 5 are wrong.
Okay, all 5 are wrong. That's trial number 1 there, and we'll try this again. Okay, so we'll shake them up again. We'll drop them again. All right, let's see, what do we got? All right, the quarter has come up heads. That's good. The dime is still not right. The nickel did come up tails. The shiny penny is not right. The dark penny also did not come up right. So
you got 2 of them right.
I got 2 of them right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm only going to pick up those coins that did not come up the right way and mark that down. That's trial number 2. Shake these guys up again, drop them again. Okay, the dime is not right. The shiny penny is heads. The dark penny is tails. That was drop number 3.
Right.
Okay, so we have the dime to go. And now I take that and I drop that down. Which way is it going to go?
So that's trial number 4.
Okay,
so now we're number 5.
Moving on here. It's all, it's science. It takes time, guys.
50-50 chance.
There we go. All right.
There we go.
We
did
did
it. Tries.
Okay, did it in 5 tries. So what's the point of all that? Well, the point of it is that natural selection is a cumulative process. The idea that mistaken idea that some people have is that you suddenly go from an amoeba swimming around in the ocean to a fully formed human being with a brain with millions of cells and the complexity that we see in organisms like ourselves. The idea that you go from that very quick step from very simple to very complex is very mistaken. The natural selection process works on what traits are already there, and it's cumulative. Just as in this case, I saved the coins that were what worked. In this case, it's what I wanted to work. In the natural world, there's no wanting involved, but excuse me. But what you have is organisms with traits that are beneficial to survive in a particular environment. When the environment starts to change, it's not like that organism is going to totally lose all its traits and start over again. Let's see, you got a call. You want to take that?
Yeah, let's see if the phone.
And I'll move on after that. Yeah,
here.
Good idea.
We're going to try it. Joe?
Hello?
Good morning.
Morning. Unfortunately, science is not my field, so this question is not going to be that intelligent.
Okay.
The thing is, though, when you hear a lot of arguments against evolution, they'll say something, well, like, if evolution is true, how did something as perfect as the eye develop or how did a feather evolve from a scale? It's which I don't really have an answer for, because it's like I'm saying, I'm more interested in religion than I am science, so that's why I have to ask this question.
Well, we got, like I said, John Koonz is going to try to answer that.
First of all, it's a non-argument. An eye is not perfect. The photoreceptors, those are the cells that gather the photons and that sends a signal to the brain in all vertebrates. The photoreceptors are actually backwards. The reason why you have a blind spot in your eye is where the photoreceptors are basically wired in backwards, and the excuse me, well, I'm having trouble here. The reason to have that blind spot is the optic nerve is the bundle where the photoreceptors. I'll tell you, I'm going to draw a picture. Can we, I don't know, see if we can get a. Here we go. Yeah, we'll put that on camera 1. Okay, what you see right there is a very bad picture. This is supposed to be an eye. Okay, over here is supposed to be the pupil of the eye. Light's coming in here. It's coming back to the back of the eye and making the photons are hitting these cells that are back here on the back of the eye. And then the message is being sent to the brain, but basically like the wiring has to cross in front of the other photoreceptors. Had an eye been designed by a thinking force, those photoreceptors would be the other way around, and they wouldn't be getting in the way. What you see in evolution is, and the other thing that was mentioned is scales and feathers. Feathers are modified scales. One place that you can see that is you can look on the leg of a chicken, and you can see where the scales grade into feathers. In fact, one time when I lived in London, they had a fried chicken place. It was Kentucky Fried Chicken, and we bought one actually had the feathers still on the fried chicken. It was really nasty, but it was a great example of evolution right there, talking about how they do grade together. Now, there is no perfect design. What happens in nature is natural selection works on what structures are already present. The wings of a bird are not perfect designs. The wings in a bird, the bones in there, are the same bones that you have in your hand.
Dear Lord, it's a demon bird!
Good one, Arlo.
A little Simpsons outtake there. Did that answer your questions there, Joe? Joe?
I think I heard him click off before. I think he got somebody else on there.
Okay. But along those same lines, I've heard other people that argue against evolution was talking about that any changes were always degenerative. They say that they argue against accumulative.
Right.
And I have a hard time. They say it doesn't happen, but it's there in the books. I mean, not books, but it's in the fossil record that
You
it's
can
actually.
see it.
Yeah. Okay.
It's there.
Oh, go ahead, Joe.
Just a couple of things. I've heard people argue that, oh well, you know, those photoreceptors in the eyes are really the way they need to be, and we just don't understand what special purpose was being served in God designing the eyes that way. But there are creatures that have eyes that evolved independently that where the photoreceptors are actually oriented the right way.
Cephalopods.
Cephalopods.
Octopi and they're related species have photoreceptors going in the right
It's entirely possible to have eyes where the photoreceptors are the other way around, and those work fine. In fact, they work better than ours.
Right.
Along the, we got green lights where I thought I was supposed to have red lights here. So I'm going to try line 1. And George?
Yes.
Good morning.
Hi, George.
Hi, how are you doing?
Real good.
I have some comments.
Sure.
Yeah, you guys are talking about natural selection. That's cool, but natural selection and adaptation and modifications it's a whole different idea.
I thought they'd all be the same, wouldn't they?
Well,
what's the difference?
Well, the difference is adaptation is changing, and natural selection is pretty much weeding out, like what you're saying. It's not changing. It's not adding.
The natural selection is the reason for the change.
Right.
Yeah, but take for example, like the okay, let's say that the fish is going to need to walk away from the pool because the water's receding, or the extra animals that it eats are dying off and whatever, because for some reason that region is receding in the water. Okay. I mean, I realize that, this example may be weird and whatever, and a bunch of holes in it, but okay, so let's say that it goes, well, I need to move. It develops its legs over a period of time that, a bunch of different species adaptations, whatever, that kind of stuff, to grow the legs, and then it starts walking. Well, how far away do you think it's going to have to walk to find a whole nother region that is exactly perfect for it to live there and eat there? And also, if there's a pool that's receding that he lives in, then, I mean, don't you think that the whole region will be receding? I mean, that's usually how climate works. You'd have to walk miles and miles to get to a pool.
No, you got a very simplistic look at that. You're close, but you're not 100% right on there.
You were right about one thing. There were a lot of holes in that argument. Basically, talking about the limb bones
and I didn't cut you off, George. They're playing with the phone, so bear with us. But go ahead, John.
Natural selection works on what structures are already there in the population. One of the things I kind of forgot to mention is that there's a lot of variety in the population that natural selection works on. So you look at children in your family, kittens in a litter of kittens, you're going to see lots of differences there. And those differences, you can just see that in any population. That's what natural selection works on. Organisms don't decide. Fish did not decide that they wanted to walk to a different pool, but they couldn't find one because there weren't. The reason that those limb bones were able to evolve was because the little bone buds were there, strengthening the fins to some extent. And I've been in swamps, and sometimes there are pools of water that are there, and there are other pools that are deeper, that are just a few feet away. If you have, as a fish, if you're able to, transport yourself from place to place, even a little bit, then that trait is there in the population that natural selection can cumulatively build on over time. That was the whole point of the coin demonstration, that those traits are there, and then they can be built on once they're there. So I don't know if that answers the question. I think that may be the same.
Yeah. George?
Yeah, it's the building on that doesn't really. I mean, you're saying the traits are already there, so the fish is already walking around.
Let me try this. Okay. You got. We'll go with John's example of the swamps, where you've actually got a lot of pools around, and some are bigger, and some are smaller, and some are nearly dry, and some are full. Right? There's a varied environment, and you got fish in there, and this fish eats up all the food in this pool and needs more food. For example, okay? Well, he's going to have to flop himself over to another pool where there's more food. The fish that have the traits that make them better at flopping from pool to pool are the ones that are going to survive. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's that's natural selection. That's not adaptation.
Now wait a minute.
He already has the things that let him flop around.
Meanwhile, just like in a litter of kittens, the kittens are not all identical. There are individual variations on all their traits.
They're still kittens.
They're all still kittens, but they all have individual variations. Same thing applies to fish. Some fish have slightly longer, stronger fins, and some have slightly smaller, less strong fins. And that's where you get accumulation, or the possibility of accumulation. If the ones that have the stronger, longer fins are the ones that are more efficient at getting from pool to pool, they continue to be the ones that survive.
Sure.
And as there is variation in both directions, the variation in the direction of longer, stronger fins gets selected for.
Right, but then the whole thing, evolution says, or Darwinianism anyways, says that there's a next step. That, lung sacs grow further, and then I don't know what the next step is.
Those are all the result of individual variations in those organs that develop into the different features. Right? There are muscles attached to fins. Those muscles can move the fins.
Right.
The better the ones with the stronger muscles are attached to their fins, the more natural selection selects the ones that have the more mobile fins.
I agree.
And those traits, there are different shapes to individual fins, and the ones that are shaped better to make their moving around more efficient, those get selected, as long as the conditions in their environment are such that having slightly better abilities in certain directions makes you better able to survive. Those variations are the ones that get selected.
I totally agree. Natural selection works. Totally agree. There are no transitional fossils. That's the big point.
Oh, that's what I was just. Let me take this. The fossil record bears out exactly what we were talking about. There are transitional forms between all the major taxa. That's all the major groups of organisms. All the vertebrates, for instance. You can see in the fossil record very clearly transition between amphibians and reptiles, and mammal-like reptiles, and mammals. You can see the transitional forms between reptiles and birds. They are all there.
Where is your source? Where are you getting that information?
Fossil record.
Where?
You can go to here to UT Museum, right here at University of Texas Museum.
Have you gone?
Yes.
Yes.
Did you actually see the
Yes.
transitional fossil?
Yes. If you go downstairs, go to the Texas Memorial Museum, go downstairs and look at the fossil displayed out there, and you will see transitional forms.
What? Like what? A fish that has a more developed lung sac than a one right before it?
Well, there's at least two mammal-like reptiles. So
okay, but that doesn't. What? That's two examples.
It's a small museum.
Well, okay, go to the big museum up in London where that guy.
I've been there. I lived in England for 6 years. I've been to that museum.
There's millions of fossils that have specific one species, and then there's no transitional. There should be millions and billions of transitional fossils, because that's how long it takes, right? Little tiny.
Okay, well, you know what? Let's move on here, because I think I've got some things to say about how the speciation event occurs, which I think may answer that.
Okay, but because we have a bunch of other callers there, George, I do appreciate your call.
Yeah, can I make one comment? Can I make one comment?
Sure. Yeah, I'm still watching.
Okay, go ahead.
If you look at two different, take some species at random, velociraptors, because I think they're neat and they were in a movie. If you take two different velociraptor skeletons and they're not identical, right? If there are any individual differences in there, just like you would find individual differences between two human beings, that is what natural selection works on to modify a species over time, right? I mean, it is not as if every single Triceratops is absolutely identical to every single other Triceratops, right? And so that only leaves the question of, well, okay, between this thing and this thing, it looks quite a lot different, too much different for you to think that it's another member of the same species. Is there a transition between that? Well, there sometimes is and there sometimes isn't. The question is, how picky do you want to get about how closely spaced the transitions have to be? There was a great comment by Orson Scott Card, who's a science fiction writer, talking about this demand for transitional forms. He said, what creationists really want is they want a plot of land where every single creature lay down to die on top of its daddy. And they want that piece of land never to have been involved in any upheavals, never to have been eroded away, never to have changed at all. They want an absolute record of absolutely everybody. And even then, the creationists would just say they were cousins.
Right. Every transitional form that's found for the creationists creates two more transitional forms, one on each side of it.
Exactly.
So it's pointless. I think one of the things he was going with this was this micro versus macro evolution thing that I've seen or I've heard a number of times people call in on the show and talk about. Most creationists now have been seen the light that yes, natural selection does happen. It's a fact. You can measure it. You can watch it happen, and it's been done enough times that that's a dead issue, even for most creationists. What they try to do is draw a line there between that happening within a species and then the macroevolution, where they want to say that, well, yeah, but you can't show that any new species come about. Well, if there's any doubt in your mind about that, I suggest taking a look at the Talk Origins archives on the internet. I downloaded some pages of examples of speciation. That's where new species come into existence. I ran out of printer paper though, so I only got about 26 pages. Each thing just covered with examples. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on here because it's a show of its own right here. But rest assured that the speciation, the evolution of new species has been documented. It has been seen to happen. Don't take my word for it. Go check it out and go learn about it. It is pretty comprehensive in here. It defines what's meant by a species as a distinct breeding population, where the organisms within that population are able to breed. And there's a number of examples in here where they've actually tested that they had organisms that had a common ancestor within historical times, and then when they tried to take, I can't think where it was, one of them was a fly, I'm going to look for it right now, but where they took the resulting populations and they tried to cross them, and they could not produce any offspring at all. Therefore, this new species has come about. And now that those two species are now isolated reproductively, any changes that go on within the populations, they're not going to affect the other population. They're going to diverge and go their separate ways, and may split off beyond that. But there are numerous cases there of examples of speciation happening.
We've brought those up on the show, and we still get creationists who call in and say, well, you know, those two species of flies, yeah, there's been speciation, but they're both still flies, so there hasn't really been macroevolution. The problem with the idea of macroevolution is there is no explanation offered by the creationists to say why the cumulative changes over time that they agree occur, because they agree there is natural selection, because that's obvious, why those cumulative changes over time cannot continue to accumulate to the point where you have a descendant that is not immediately recognizable as a descendant of its ancestor. Until creationists can explain what stops what they call microevolution from accumulating over time into what they would call macroevolution, they have no case.
And the fact the process does work, and you can force it to work, artificial selection, we've shown that yes, you can take things that are basically the same species, and you can make them look very different.
Yep.
If you doubt that, look at the little, what's that dog on the TV, the ad, I always think it's pretty funny.
Chihuahua?
The Chihuahua, yeah. And a Great Dane. They belong to the same species. And people did that through a process of very similar to natural selection. We just kind of forced it on them. The dogs in the background.
We're running out of time.
Yeah, I know. And you know what? There's something I really wanted to get to. I know you got a bunch of callers here, but let me try to get to this, and I'll try to go through it pretty quick.
Okay.
One of the things I wanted to talk about on the show was this nonsense going on in Kansas, and I wanted to set the record kind of straight here on what's really happening and why it's important. There's a lot of misinformation floating around there about the State Board of Education in Kansas making its decision about how to treat evolution in the school curriculum. And I want to compare that to what's going on in Texas. One thing, I also want to mention that a lot of my information here came from the National Center for Science Education and was forwarded to me by one of the workers there, Eric Wheaton. The National Center for Science Education is not an atheist organization. There are Christians that belong to it. I'm sure there are Jewish people and other religions that are part of that. But their focus is on making sure that evolution is taught properly in school, and that they're not attacking anybody's religion or anything like that, but they're just interested in making sure that good science is taught in school. I just want to make sure I said that so there's no misrepresentation of what that group's about. Basically, they forwarded me a lot of information, and I looked into some of this. The Kansas Board of Education did not ban the teaching of evolution in their curriculum. What it did was it took out references to speciation, basically, on standardized tests. To understand why this is important, you have to understand how important standardized tests are in school today. If you're 20 years old or older, you probably don't, unless you're working in school or have a kid in school, you probably don't quite get how important standardized tests have become. In Texas, the TOS test is everything right now in a public school, and everything seems to revolve around it. Basically, what the State Board of Education up there in Kansas did was it took out mention of evolution on a macroevolution scale, talking about speciation events. It also took out references to the origins of the planet and the origins of the universe. And they're not going to be testing them on this in their standardized tests in their state. And you may think, okay, what's the big deal? Because they're not saying you can't teach it. They never said that you cannot teach that information to the kids in Kansas. But what you have to understand is that if those teachers up there are not being supported at a high level, that it's just not going to get done. I know this because I teach in public school. I've taught in public school for 14 and a half years now, and I'm a department leader, science department leader, and I've worked with other department leaders. I've given presentations to lots of science teachers, and I know that and as far as evolution goes, a lot of science teachers are not covering the information at all, even though they're supposed to. Some of the ones that do only cover it because the state requires it on standardized tests like the exit test, or the biology test, TOS test that kids take in 10th grade. I looked at that test, and about 20%, 25% of the questions deal with evolution. So the teachers are going to be more likely to teach it. I have been in the situation where a parent had questioned my judgment in talking about evolution to a large extent, and what got me through it and allowed me to win out in that situation was that, yes, we do have in our curriculum guide the requirement that the kids learn about evolution. In Texas, we have the TEX, or some people pronounce it TEEKS, and it's very clear in the middle school that students will learn and be able to explain and understand how DNA causes, or the changes in DNA cause mutations. Also, hang on, I wanted to read this. That students know the theory of biological evolution. In high school, they're required to know about speciation, and it specifically says, illustrate the results of natural selection in speciation, diversity, phylogeny. And what's important about this, what we have in Texas that's so good, is that that's in there, and even a teacher who's not maybe comfortable teaching this can at least turn and say, hey, I've got to. What in Kansas, they've taken that away. I have a friend who works in Kansas and has left Kansas and told me that basically not going to get supported up there for teaching evolution. What they've done up there is they left good teachers out holding the bag, and those who are going to try to teach evolution and do a good job with science are not going to be supported at a high level that they need to be supported. One last thing, and we'll listen to some callers. One thing that has come up in the last few days is that 3 national organizations, and where are their names? Here we are. Okay, the National Research Council, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the National Science Teachers Association, they had actually information that the Kansas Board of Education had used as part of their I'm trying to think of the word, their curriculum, I guess, and their standards, that's what I meant, their educational standards. Well, these 3 organizations, just this last week, denied the Kansas Board of Education from using their copyrighted material on the Kansas Board standards because it is not in the spirit of providing real good, well-rounded information about how science it works involving evolution. So they've actually pulled that, forcing the Kansas Board of Education to go back to the drawing board and write their own standards without using the nationally done standards by these important organizations dealing in science.
That's great.
Anyway,
that's fantastic. No, I didn't know that. That putting the pressure on them to review their decision.
I'm really glad to see that, because it's going to put the pressure on them, and I think it's going to cost the taxpayer up there a lot of money now to go back and rewrite that stuff. It's very time consuming. I've been involved in it myself. I'm going to talk about that at the lecture thing today at first.
All right, let's try to get as many as we can here. We're going to go to Mike.
Yeah, hey, good morning.
Thanks for holding on.
I just wanted to kind of make a comment. I'm not no religious fanatic or nothing. I don't believe in any of that. But one of the things is that kind of disturbs me that I've just read recently is that, you know, we base most things on a large scale the general theory of relativity, on a smaller scale quantum mechanics.
Right.
These aren't compatible from what I understand. Therefore, one has to be wrong for the other to be right, or we have to make a new one, which I guess we won't be seeing coming out of Kansas, you know, which would be the quantum theory of gravity, you know. On the second hand, we'll move on to evolution. Natural selection, of course, we can see all the time, and of course there's been big evolutionary jumps, and to that one caller that said, oh, there should be millions of fossils just laying around. I mean, what are the chances of something being fossilized? That's an absurd statement right there. You know, most things just rot away and go, you know, back to their basic components. But, you know, there is one thing that kind of gets me is that, well, except for the new sulfur-based life down there at the bottom of the ocean, is we don't really see new orders of life. You know what I'm saying? There's like the horseshoe crab belongs to a totally separate order of life,
Right.
and all that's disappeared, and
those niches in the environment are being taken up by the ones that are there, and you're not going to see.
So what you're saying is that's kind of like a...
It's okay. Oh, it's kind of like if you take all the money in your checking account and go out and try to start a major car dealership on the side of I-35. You're going to be able to compete with everybody who's already there. You know, that's the same thing. You're not going to see new life coming about. It's because it's going to have to compete with the things that are already established. And
unless we have extreme changes in the environment.
Yeah, right. Unless you have extreme changes, and maybe my economic example there in the greatest, but. The internet. Okay, yeah. Okay.
Well,
thanks for nothing there. Yeah, that's true.
So it's kind of like a few things have to come into play to bring about a whole new species.
And back to your first point, though, you're absolutely right.
Yes.
In the quantum world, they have the theories there, and then relativity for out here into the real world, they both work. What the deal is, we have not figured out the grand unified theory.
Right.
There is a theory out there that will explain both of those and still be able to work. And we're in the research.
It doesn't mean that either one of those things is completely wrong. It might be that both of them are slightly wrong in very minor ways that if we just change them, then they'll work together.
Because they do
We just don't have the overarching mathematics to link them up.
I mean, it's kind of like we still use Newton's deal over Einstein's just for practicability, and to me that's kind of bogus, but, you know.
How much does warp space-time really affect? You know,
it's really hard to get. It's really hard to get sixth graders to get into relativity, but you can do some of the Newton's things because it's basic algebra.
Okay, well, y'all have a good day.
All right, you have a great week.
Thanks for the call.
Take care. Let's go on down to our second mic.
Yeah, hello.
Good morning.
Interesting show.
Thank you.
I'd like to know just exactly what we evolved from. I mean, I think that, you know, we know that evolution is real. Over millions of years, we saw that, and scientists have discovered all this stuff. But what just exactly did human beings evolve from?
Would be an ape-like creature. It wasn't the exact ape.
We're related to chimpanzees and bonobos and gorillas and orangutans, most closely to chimpanzees and bonobos.
And the other question was, why haven't, you know, we have our scientists have uncovered all these different species that have evolved for millions of years. Why haven't we uncovered this creature? I mean, is this the thing that they're looking for often?
Well, it's not like it's one day there's an ape-like ancestor, the next day there's a human and there's a chimp. There's a lot of transitional forms in between there. There's a lot of branching. Evolution does not work as like a straight line from one thing to another.
Exactly.
So when they find these new fossils, they have to put them into the, figure out where they fit into what they already know. And also had to realize that, like the other caller said, most things don't get fossilized. And you have to look at the environment that they lived in. That's not a great place to become a fossil. Seashells leave better fossils than things that walk along in the grasslands.
Exactly, and
so
I know what you're saying, and I agree.
We may never know all we want to know about that, but there's millions of square miles of desert out there that they're exploring, looking for things. So hopefully, maybe they'll find something.
And I brought in that Time magazine from I think it was like 2 months ago that were talking about the recent discoveries that we're finding closer and closer cousins to our ancestors all the time. So we just in the last few years, the fossils that they're finding are reconfirming all along, how close we are to the apes.
And almost at this point, more importantly, you can look at the DNA evidence there, and you can see the relationship between the different organisms. And we share 98.5% of our DNA with the chimpanzee and the bonobo.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm really not trying to argue with you.
No, I understand.
I'm really not. I'm just trying to...
Actually, I would. If I was a bonobo or a chimpanzee, I think I'd be a creationist. Looking at some of the things that human beings do, I think I'd be pretty upset about natural selection myself.
It seems to me that as much stuff as we have uncovered, that we would be able to find more evidence of, this chain that we have gone through to evolve into what we are now. That just seems real strange to me, and I've got some ideas. I believe both ways. I believe in God, and I believe in evolution as well. And what I have come to is that this missing link that we are looking for could possibly be God, in that the way that it is described in the Bible as how this thing came about, if you read it real close in the beginning, it tells the same steps and the same sequences that we know happened and evolved. We crawled out of the water, we did all
wait a minute. There's two different versions of creation in the Bible, so which one are you talking about?
Well, there again, there are a lot of things that we can't know, admittedly.
I really hate to cut you off, man, but I got a bunch of other
Actually,
callers.
that's really not correct. I've seen some discussion on that claim that the steps described in Genesis match up to what we know. They really don't. There's some very remarkable gaps and things out of sequence.
It has plants showing up before the sun.
Plants showing up before the sun is a real problem.
Yeah, and the keeping track and record of all this would be really, this was thousands of years ago, and then we're talking about millions of years in this evolution thing. So trying to describe this could obviously have mistakes in it. Man trying to write down what he thought was correct at that particular point in time.
Okay. I do appreciate your call.
Thank you.
All right, you have a great week. All right, let's go on down to Sam.
Hi.
Hey, Sam.
Well, I'm fine. How about you? I guess you probably know who I am. We've sort of seen each other.
Yes.
All right. Well, just thought I'd mention one thing.
Sure.
A thing much more convincing of evolution than the fossil record are what you might call some living forms and vestigial organs. For instance, the flounder. All right, you show them the flounder. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
All right. It's totally obvious by looking at a living flounder that it once was different than it is. And the transition has been imperfect. It looked like something by Picasso. Or then there's flightless birds, right? The kiwi, the ostrich. All right, I don't know if God created those all at once. Certainly, she has a whimsical sense of humor, right? The ostrich. Obviously, it was once a thing that flew, now no longer, right? And then there's, I guess the appendix in ourselves, right? And on a blue whale. One time I saw a skeleton of a blue whale. Oh, about 3/4 ways back, there was a couple of bones about the size of my arm, my leg. And there's no way these things are going to propel the blue whale anywhere.
And the snake has the same vestigial bones back there, hip bones.
Exactly so. And, there's a kind of a sneaky thing that's going on besides the Kansas business, which a lot of people haven't sort of taken note of. But it seems I've seen a bunch of biology textbooks. Now, they no longer show the stages of the embryo recapitulating phylogeny there. Now they act like it's a little homunculus. They've managed to kind of sneak this thing in where you see it's like a tiny little man right from the beginning, instead of the way I remember it being shown. You could see sort of the reptilian stage, and then there was the tail, and then there was the hairline real low that sort of gradually go up. This has been sort of deleted from a lot of biology textbooks.
I'd like to see that. If you could show me or tell me which one's got that, I'd like to see that. Actually, I testified for the State Board of Education a couple years ago, myself, Howard Thompson, and Steve Bratting, about the biology textbooks. And the state of Texas has not only good standards as far as teaching science goes, I think, but also has adopted some excellent biology textbooks. We're in good shape on that. There were a couple that weren't any good, but there are also some very good textbooks. I'd be very curious to see what book you're talking about.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And I don't know, I haven't really taken note of it, but I noticed a couple times they sort of changed the story a little bit with that. At least some of the ones I've seen. All right, I'll try to find one. That,
I'd like to see that.
I heard a joke about it. All right, not about that exactly, but all right. So this preacher, and he's preaching to the congregation there, and he said, "And the Lord made each thing perfect after its own kind." From the back of the crowd, up comes this hunchback, and he looks up at the preacher and he says, "Did the Lord make me perfect?" The preacher thinks for a minute, he say, "Why, certainly. You're the most perfect hunchback I've ever seen."
Thanks for your call.
Thanks, Sam.
All right.
Take care. All right, let's go on down to Paul. Quickly.
Hey, this is Paul.
Yes.
Hi, Paul.
Paul Wilson.
Yes.
I just sort of wanted to take exception to an assumption that several of the callers seem to have expressed. and that is that there's not enough transitional fossils.
Thank you.
In evolutionary biology, the main problem is not that we don't have enough transitional fossils, is that we have too many. Because the tree of evolution is too bushy, and it's hard to tell which ones did descend from which other ones, because you have so many variations that died out. So there's plenty of variation there. And another thing that somebody said is that, and this is a very common thing, is that natural selection only explains the weeding out of things. It doesn't explain the creative part of where new things come from. And there are very well-known mechanisms by which we get variation in the population and by which we preserve variation in the population.
Yep.
So the simplest way we get variation is just by mutation. And you get a lot of genes that get mutated, and they take a slightly different form, and a lot of the time that kills the organism, but a lot of the time it changes it a little bit. And sex is something that is really important, that people don't understand that one of the most important things in their lives, sex, is an evolutionary mechanism that we evolved so that we could evolve faster. The whole point of sex in evolutionary terms is so that we can have lots of variation in the population, so that some trait that's useful sometimes doesn't just get thrown out, that we reassort the genes and we have recessive genes and things like that. And if you're looking for a good transitional form, I think Homo sapiens is a really good transitional form example. If you for example, we all have back problems when we get old because we were originally not evolved to be bipeds, and it's sort of a kludge that we are what we are. And our heads are too big for our moms to give birth to us, which means we get born in this sort of half-formed state, and 1/4 of all women who ever lived died in childbirth. This is a singularly poor record among all the species we know. And it's because we evolved to have these big heads, but we can't quite cope. And if that's not a good example of a transitional form, I don't know what is. Evolution is somewhat short-sighted. If there was a God, we would have evolved from kangaroos, so that we didn't need to have these big heads kill our moms. And also, there's a lot of examples of partial adaptations that are sort of okay, and I think the walking catfish is a good example of that. That there are plenty of transitional states where some very rudimentary version of something, the anti-evolutionists will say, well, that wouldn't be useful, but in fact it would be quite useful. So, like, for example, eyes have evolved about 5 separate times, and one reason why is a photosensitive patch, just a slightly photosensitive patch on an animal, is a useful thing to help it know when it's in the sun and should move to the shade. And then a photosensitive patch in a pit that makes it directional, because it can only get light from one direction, is useful, because it can have a very rough sense of vision that way, kind of like the way pit vipers see in the dark. You know, rattlesnakes can see you in the dark in the infrared because they have little infrared proto-eyeballs that are that kind of evolutionary adaptation.
And Paul, hang on a second. Let me just say something here. Can you get a close-up on this book right here? I'll put it on camera too there. Anyway, the name of this book is The Blind Watchmaker by Richard Dawkins. It's an excellent book, and it talks in great detail exactly what Paul's talking about there, and goes through all of those and more. If you're interested in learning more about how evolution works, this is an excellent source of information right here. I thought I'd just throw that in since he did mention something that...
All right, we got to go, Paul. We're running out of time.
Oh, okay.
All right, you have a great week.
You too.
All right, just want to remind everyone, we're heading down to up to Furs at North Cross Mall. That's our lecture series we do first Sunday of every month, and John Koonz is going to be there. So if you're on the line, you didn't get through, come on down and maybe you can ask your question in person. We're down to less than a minute. I guess I'll try. Oh, no, they're hanging up.
Visit our website.
Okay. And, we love you, Austin. Hang in there. Our website, www.atheist-community.org, gives you more information about our lecture series and our TV show. That's wild, isn't it?
That's St. Ray.
Yeah. That's sending out my love to all of you there in Austin there.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for watching.